So, hello and welcome to InSolidarity, a podcast by the Seva Cooperatives Federation. This is the first episode in a new series where we unpack questions on climate, gender, equity, and cooperatives.
अभी तो बहुत बड़ा सपना है हमारा
કામની બહુ જ જરૂરત તમે મને લઈ જાઓ
अब हम लोग के पास कैपिटल आ गया अब हम लोग खुल के करेंगे बिजनेस
સમયમાં તો જોવા જઈએ તો આપણો બધો કામમાં જ સમય જાય છે પોતાના માટે સમય કાઢવો બહુ મુશ્કેલ હોય છે
अभी हम लोग मतलब ये पैसा राउंड होते होते हम लोग 12-13 लाख का बिजनेस चल रहा है
Today, we are really excited to be speaking with Dr. Indu Murthy, who is the Sector Head, Climate, Environment and Sustainability at the Center for Science, Technology and Policy in Bangalore. Her areas of interest include climate change vulnerability, land-based mitigation and adaptation, resilience building or climate-proofing development. She holds a PhD in ecology and environmental sciences from Puducherry University, and also has a connection with Gujarat, where she studied botany at MS University, Baroda, with a specialization in forestry and environment. Welcome, Dr. Murthy. It's really great to have you.
Hi Neha, it's my pleasure to be here, and I'm really happy to be participating in the first of the series of podcasts that you're going to be putting together. Happy to be here.
Right. So we begin with a quick word association game. I'm going to speak a word and you have to just say what first comes to mind.
Sure.
So let's start. Okay. So heat.
Sweat.
Resilience.
Women.
Carbon.
Vehicles.
Workers.
Hardworking. Vulnerable.
All right. So vulnerability.
Informal workers.
Okay. Adaptation.
Ad hoc.
Cooperatives.
Convening power.
Climate finance.
Still very inadequate.
Agroecology.
Biodiversity.
Sustainability.
Can't really think of anything. Wow. Sustainability to me is, I would say, traditional practices.
Okay, so that's really interesting, and it actually sets the context really well for some of the themes that we'll be discussing today. So, before we get into talking about policy and resilience, we'd like to give our listeners a sense of the work that you do. And can you walk us through a typical day? What a typical day at CSTEP looks like, and what does climate proofing look like?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, nice. I'm happy to talk about my typical day. So on any given day, when I'm here in Bangalore, which is where our headquarters is, which is where I come into work, I mean, it starts with coming in, and then of course, you're having conversations around typically various different teams my groups work on. So the groups that I kind of lead, they look at climate adaptation and climate risk. So there is work happening in the urban spaces, there's work happening in the rural spaces, and typically around, the big climate extremes that we keep hearing and reading about, whether it is to do with a heat wave, whether it's to do with flooding, sometimes sea level rise. So these are issues around which there is a lot of research that the teams do. So we kind of talk about these in the context of urban and rural, also in the context of various sections of the society as well, because we have a few projects which are typically looking at how the impacts are not the same across various different sections of the society, or different geographies as well. And then there's another team which is looking at longer term kind of issues around, what would a kind of a different imagined future look like if we were to cut down emissions, and then where do you cut it down? So all sectors of the economy, what needs to be done, what exactly do we do? And of course, these are very far into the future. So obviously, how do you engage with people? How do you get traction from the government to kind of use this research and information to actually kind of inform their policy making or their developmental programs? Otherwise, you're kind of not paying attention to things that science is already giving indications on as to how worse it could become, and you're just doing things in the business as usual, which means you're actually ending up in doing things that might cost you much more. When I say cost, it's not necessarily just financial cost, but it's also about, lives, livelihoods, loss of biodiversity may be in an extreme case. So these are the kind of issues. And then, of course, there is a third group, which is looking at, how do you make all of these sustainable? What is it that we do? Yeah, it's great for today. It's great for, say, next 10 years or 15 years. But then would it sustain over a period of time? And what would it take for it to sustain? Is it a policy? Is it an incentive? Is it climate finance that needs to be there? Or is it change in the mindsets, awareness? So all of these different things that we talk about, and we try to see, who are our stakeholders, and then how do we engage with them? Do we need to build their capacities in identifying information, or use that information that is available if they are aware of it, and how do they integrate it into their day-to-day activities? So we work with government stakeholders, with ministries to, urban local bodies to civil society organizations like SEVA, is something that we constantly endeavor to engage with, to try and see how do we kind of integrate the science and evidence that we create here as a policy think tank.
Wow, that's really interesting and really important as well. Tell me a bit about these assessments. How do we integrate informal women workers there? Because these women are also generally invisible even in the workforce. So
Right.
what
Right.
can be better done to ensure that they are integrated into such risk assessment frameworks?
Right. So one of the key things that we've learned in the process of doing these kind of assessments at different scales is that the perspectives that come in when you bring in people from, at different sections of the society, or different gender for that matter, or people involved in different kinds of work, formal versus informal, people with certain access and certain limited access to resources, is that the narratives and the solutions that we are creating could be very different. Now, that's where what we've realized is that we constantly kind of try and integrate a kind of a stakeholder consultation process into all the work that we do. So at different scales, right from conception to, at different stages of the solutioning part of the story, we try to see, who is my end user, and then go and talk to them. Okay, this is what is the thinking, or what would you like, typically would like to see? What is it that is going to be useful to you? Because, there is no dearth of solutions around us, honestly speaking. There's so much that's happening, be it the startup, be it the government, or be it, other private sector agencies, which have put out so much into that. There is a lot of solutions around us, but yet a lot of it is not being picked up and used the way it was intended to be. So which means there must be some barrier to its use. So we try to understand, what is that barrier out there? Is there a possibility for us to overcome that? Can we tide over that and actually create something that would be useful? Which makes it all the more challenging, because as a policy think tank, for instance, if we are looking at a state or a district level, the kind of frameworks and the kind of solutions we kind of broadly draw the contours would be very different. So which is why we believe in creating these tools and frameworks which could be adapted and tailored to different sets of people, or to different geographies. So that's how we've realized we can actually make things work for the right set of people in typical environments.
All right. So, just building on that, you mentioned startups, you mentioned different kinds of economic actors. So, what about the smaller economic actors, like women-led cooperatives, for instance, or the nano enterprises? So, risk assessments do tend to, or what we see in the mainstream at least, do tend to focus on the larger institutions, but these smaller groups also face climate challenges. And how can we develop tools that actually support their planning needs for climate risks, and also ensure that is kind of mainstreamed?
Yeah, Yeah. No, you're rightly said, Neha. I think what gets missed out, be it the MSMEs or the smaller enterprises, is that, while they are central to promoting climate resilient livelihoods, and they are like the backbone of many of the economies, actually, because, without them, the last mile, getting a product into the market potentially could completely fall apart if we don't really have them. I mean, in Bangalore, we have, the road that I take to go home. There are so many garment factories that I cross every evening, and I see hundreds of women coming out every day, every day. So, which means, they're doing so much there, which is what makes it to the malls and typically, there's large establishments that are there. Now, garment is just one segment, but then there are so many other places that small enterprises are doing a fair bit, and a lot that are there. The collectives are doing a lot. But I think typically what's kind of missing in this entire conversation is that, we don't have very targeted support to them, whether it is financial, whether it is policy. I think you used a term that people are not seen, they're invisible, right? So how do we make them visible in the conversation? The only way we could do it is to kind of bring them right into the conversation right in the beginning, and then come, typically look at the problem from their eyes. Otherwise, there is no way we will be able to solve. I mean, I can think that I understand their problem because I'm also a woman, but then I don't understand their lived realities, because, what they go through on a day-to-day basis could be very different from what I can't even imagine. So, which is where I think on the policy side, I would think, we need to incentivize and promote, climate friendly business models to begin with, particularly those led by women, because Seva is actually kind of, working in that particular space. So I think, that's something that typically a government-led business model would also be very, very useful, maybe through procurement support or subsidies or inclusion in the climate planning processes. I think that is really very important. So the bottom line would be, small enterprises and cooperatives should not be treated as just another business, but very critical lifelines that would help climate adaptation as well as mitigation, because by supporting them, we would actually be building not just greener economies, but something that's inclusive and equitable ultimately, which is the larger vision and goal that any system should have.
Right. So actually, before we move forward, and maybe some of our listeners are kind of uninitiated. If adaptation and mitigation are two words that we hear a lot.
Right.
Sometimes some people use them synonymously, but how are they different? If you could just explain to us.
Right. To simply put, when I say mitigation, it's ways and means of reducing emissions, right? How do I reduce greenhouse gas emissions from any activity that I am doing? For instance, if I'm using a petrol vehicle, can I switch to an electric vehicle, or can I cycle to my workplace, right? So that completely cuts down the use of an emitting source like a petrol or a diesel. So that's mitigation. Adaptation is, we all know that there is an increase in temperature or there is flooding that's happening. So how do you cope with what already you're experiencing? Now, that is what adaptation. Adaptation is an adjustment to these extremes, or to these, things that are erratic and things that are beyond what is business as usual, or what is normal, and what is something that you and I have experienced over our lifetime. It could be temperatures, it could be amount of rainfall that we receive on a typical day. So those adjustments are adaptation.
All right. So, I mean, thank you for giving us that clarity. Just zooming out a little bit in terms of the sector, development sector at large, would you say that development organizations, and many of whom actually can play this role of being, mediators between helping, a certain section or a certain type of target group, play the role of facilitators and mainstreaming their perspectives. But do you think these organizations at large are climate proofed, so to speak? Are they equipped with the right lens and the skills to really plan for climate risks, or help the communities that they work with plan for climate risks?
Yeah. That's a very interesting question, Neha. I mean, my answer would be yes and no, because we have so many organizations across the ecosystem. While some very large organizations have typically kind of tried to integrate it or mainstream, for want of any better word, which is often used, is something that they've tried to do. But I think we have the larger number is these mid-size and smaller organizations which are working in the development sector. Our experience of doing a series of capacity building programs across 5 different states, I think the year before, what kind of emerged from that is that typically these organizations, they told us during our sessions with them that a lot of the funders are asking us to kind of bring in the climate lens to the work that we do. I work on poverty alleviation. I work on agricultural, intensification, or better agricultural systems. I have no clue how do I do it. Although they actually are experiencing those changes, they're unable to kind of think about it outside as a lens which the funder is wanting. So
Right.
one of the key things that we kind of try to do is that it's an integral system. Why don't think of it as a burden? It's very much integral to what you and I do typically on a day-to-day basis. So I think the effort to kind of make them recognize that it's something that's already integrated. All that you need to do is pay a little more attention to it while you do look at development, you do look at livelihood improvement. You just need to bring in this additional lens. It's
Right.
not a burden, it's just one more lens to the problem that you're putting, because you're investing, you're working with your farmers, or you're working with federations, or you're working with women to better their lives. Now, to do that, you're putting together a set of strategies. Now, all you're going to do when you bring in the climate lens is that how do I make sure that what I'm doing today for under XYZ conditions of temperature or rainfall, if it is dependent on rainfall, the strategy that we are putting together is dependent on climate, for instance, or it's climate sensitive. How does it hold good even under an altered kind of a situation, maybe more heat or maybe more rainfall or less rainfall? How does it hold good? So it's just an added lens to the problem where you're not thinking about just today and tomorrow, you're thinking slightly longer term, right? So that is the thing. So a large proportion of the organizations are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis without actually recognizing that they are doing it. So which is why I said yes and no to this, because, unknowingly, there's a lot that's being done. But then time has come when people have to recognize it, because we are getting into what we call as new normals. What we experienced up till now is very different from what we are currently experiencing and what we are likely to experience in the future. Science very clearly says that we are all looking at a warmer and a wetter future. But then, unfortunately, the warmer and the warming is fine. I mean, that's something everybody understands, feels it on a day-to-day basis. But what we don't really kind of get a sense of is when we say wetter future, yes, more rainfall in a drier region seems like good news, but unfortunately, the distribution is what matters. You're looking at more of extremes, more extreme rainfall, and then an extended period of dryness or a drought, which is a
Right.
problem. So I think the recognition of that is lacking, which is what I think typically people who have that knowledge, people, think tanks like us, should be typically kind of working with developmental organizations to help tweak the way they look at the problem, tweak the way they do things. I would definitely not say that, we've got to teach them. No, that's not the case at all. They already are doing a lot. All they need to do is tweak it, look at it from a different angle. The dimension, one of the dimensions which is imbibed and embedded in what they do, needs to be pulled out a bit to be recognized as an additional lever that's very important in what they are doing.
Right. And that's really interesting, actually, because, from what you say now, this is something that actually everyone will need it's you don't actually need to be living in the hottest or
Mm.
the wettest places. It's actually a complete change from what you're sort of have been used to over time. If that is changing,
Right.
the ways of working and the the sort of the means that you are working with will change. And this maybe is knowledge, or this vocabulary and this lens is something that organizations will need to also have some foresight to
Yes.
be able to better serve the
Absolutely.
communities that they're working with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I also like this thought about, it's not a burden, it's just an added lens,
Yes.
integrated into something that we're already doing.
True.
If we can talk also now a bit about agriculture, particularly,
Mm.
we're also seeing a growing push for agroecological transitions,
Yeah.
also bioregional planning that is more contextual, along with reduced dependence on chemical inputs.
Mm.
Uh, some of these practices also center around the idea of a contiguous farm.
Right.
And at the same time, we also know that a large proportion of farmers in India are smallholders.
Mm.
And given the financial and structural constraints that, even, smallholder farmers, but women farmers also kind of face, what do you think needs to be done to ensure that they are not left behind? It's a huge
Mm.
majority that would be left behind.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenge for agriculture in India is because we're dealing with small and marginal farmers, and the land holding sizes are reducing year after year. Gone are the days, because I mean, nuclear families, it's not about just in the urban spaces. It is happening, divided families within the rural systems. I still remember, a few years back when I was working in the Western Ghats villages. So we were going by the land parcel from the revenue department. You have these numbers that are allotted to land parcels. So we would go and look for them. Then say 1A, 1B, 1C. I mean, what the hell is this? I have only one number on my records, and then they say no, our family's been divided. Brother. The eldest has this parcel and the youngest has this parcel, and then somebody is sitting out there. So, that is the way it is. And obviously, although it is the same family, each of them have their own ways of farming, right? So obviously they're not going to be doing the same thing. So given that, while bioregional planning is excellent, because, actually it kind of brings back to the fact that how do you kind of do things that is suited for that particular region? Because, I mean, it's easier said than done, because I think markets have a large role to play in all that agricultural systems finally do, because it's a farmer's prerogative what they are cultivating, unless there's like a very high level policy push, which also is very hard to come by, because we're looking at a huge population here, which should agree to that kind of a planning process. um,
And also, now that you mentioned policy, I feel like there's also probably the policy environment doesn't also really give farmers a choice on what to grow really with the
right.
MSP and such. People will stick to maybe rice and wheat.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, also, one is, of course, okay, even if we imagine that, because of a policy push or an incentive, there is a switch. Let's say the farmer does decide to switch and align with what the government is wanting. But I think it doesn't end there, right? You need to create markets there.
Mm.
Now, how do you market that? And again, I think one of the missing pieces in this entire conversation is, would we be increasing the carbon footprint or the carbon miles of produce that will have to travel from one place to another if you kind of restrict growth to only certain regions? Or can we think about bioregions producing all the basics that is required for a region? Then probably, you're doing both, reducing emissions, that's your mitigation part of the story, as well as, adaptation, because you're talking about suited crop varieties and fruits and other vegetables that you're growing in that particular space. So I think there's a lot of thinking that still needs to get in there. While it sounds great as a concept, actually rolling it out on the ground has its own challenges. And then, of course, finally, the call will come from the farmer actually wanting to do it. Another important piece in this entire puzzle is do they have the skill sets to change their cropping, right? I mean, they used to, if a farmer for generations is used to growing rice, will he or she be able to switch to growing a millet, a ragi, or or some other kind of a crop, or even a vegetable crop? I think so. There is a knowledge system that is inherent. Now, how do you kind of get them to talk about these? How do you get them to realize this? Now, and again, within this, of course, there are these large farmers who might be ready to experiment because they have large land holdings. So he or she might say, okay, I'll put part of my land, let me experiment with something new. And if it's viable and if there is a market, I'm happy to make that switch to a larger area. But then when you're looking at very small farmers and even marginal farmers, the risk-taking ability is very low, because if they lose everything. So do we have a buffer to support them in that switch period, whether it is a kind of a farming practice which is weaning away from, say, fertilizers, then in which case there is always a drop in yield, because let's recognize that use of these chemical amendments to the soil over multiple decades have completely eroded the soil of its fertility, which
Right.
is why it's not able to yield as much. Now, if you say, okay, you do organic farming, it'll become better. Yes, it will, but it requires that time to come back to a state, right? It's recovery. I mean, it's like, I fall sick, and then, I can't just, the minute my fever goes down, I can't jump back into work in my full force. I require some time to get back to normalcy. So the soil is a live resource in that way. So it requires some time to bounce back into a condition where it is able to kind of give those yields that it can if it's really fertile. But for it to build up, there is a time lag there. There is some time that's required. Now, how do you support people? How do you support particularly these marginal farmers, when they are actually taking that risk to switch? What are the ways in which a policy or a scheme can support? I think these are the questions that will need to be kept in mind.
Right. And I think from what you're saying, what I get is that it's actually not just one sort of strategy. It'll have to be like a bundle of services where we're looking
Yes.
at the ability to take risk. We're looking
Yeah.
at training that also considers the market for the particular crop, and
Right.
the whole also facilitating that access to the market, and soil health as well.
Yes.
So I think that's also sort of a mindset shift for also our agriculture extension
True.
systems who work on risk taking ability, and also not just training but thinking of those market linkages as well while
Right.
doing the trainings. All right. Uh, so let's talk about adaptation and mitigation.
Mhm.
We're seeing within the space of mitigation, there are some innovations that we're seeing, things like we hear of decentralized renewable energy, bio inputs and such. But it seems that adaptation seems to be, more localized or more niche, as it were.
Yeah.
So, what are the systemic factors that contribute to this? And how could collectives be a part of this process of building resilience through adaptation?
Right. The reason that, mitigation is always kind of hogged the limelight, if I may say so, whether it is to do with the narratives that we talk about, whether it is to do with the technological and finance flow into these spaces, is because it's very tangible. You
Right.
replace something that is emitting a lot with something that emits less. So it's a delta that you immediately are able to measure, right? So which is where, it's easy, it's very tangible, it is measurable, and you can see the impact of it very fairly soon. Like,
Mhm.
for instance, take a place where, there are a lot of these polluting lorries that are plying on a particular road, right? The smoke that's coming out, there's pollution that's there. You can see it yourself. Now, in a kind of an imaginary situation, in a typical situation, you
Yeah.
replace that for a day or a few hours with completely, say everybody is cycling. COVID is a classic case when, we saw what non-movement of vehicles can do to the air, right? It cleaned up everything. So it was very evident, it was visible. People were able to feel it, sense it, and measure it also for a large extent. But adaptation is much more, how do I say it? It's a very slow process. It's not like changing a bulb. It's much more systemic in the way, because you do something with a certain system, it takes its own sweet course of time to actually give benefits. It doesn't kind of immediately kind of show you next year. And also sometimes what you do today, you may not be able to see the benefit of it to next year. The classic case is, let's say, a region which is typically drought prone. Now, in an agricultural system, we go with great knowledge and science, and we say, okay, let's replace this particular crop that you are planting over years, which is failing year after year because you have droughts happening every year. Repetitively, year after year, you're facing droughts. So let's replace this particular crop, is what you say. Now, the farmer does believe us, and then they do replace that particular crop. And then the next season, cropping season, it so happens that there is no drought, but then there is heavy rainfall, which is a classic pattern that we are seeing today. Very drought prone regions are also experiencing heavy rainfall in an untimely manner. Now, what you actually did as a drought proofing strategy does not hold good in a flood condition. So it completely falls apart, right? So that's one, where the conditions could change so drastically that you don't know if what you did was right or wrong. The other is, it is still a drought prone region. You don't get heavy rainfall, but then it's a normal year, right? But your yields of this particular crop that you've introduced is much lesser than the crop that you were used to planting earlier. And in a normal year, it would give you more income. And probably, I as a farmer would think, what did I do? I would have earned much more if I had planted my usual crop. So if somebody is introducing something, so typically you're actually wishing for the worst to happen to show that what I introduced is successful. Now that's what adaptation does. It makes you wish for the extreme to happen, so you're able to kind of establish for yourself that this is a very successful story. Now that's not how it works, unfortunately. That's not how it should work also. So that's why, gone are the days when people were, talking about drought proofing and flood proofing. So I think we are coming to a stage, because the way the systems are so erratic, because in a drought prone region you also see extreme rainfall. I think we need to be looking at what we call as multiplicity of risks or compounded risks to any system. Now, so what does that mean? That means, can we think about solutions which are balanced, which are able to cope under all kinds of extremes? Now, that requires a lot of research also, because typically in an agriculture, all the Indian Council on Agricultural Research, ICAR institutions, have all focused their energies on creating these salt-tolerant varieties, drought-tolerant varieties, flood-tolerant varieties. But then what we are looking for now is a mix of a variety which is so sturdy that it's able to give some yield even under drought and a flood condition, potentially. So you're looking at a compounding kind of a risk there. So which is what, complicates that entire issue here. And, how do you kind of pull them in? That's why adaptation is, it's context specific. And secondly, the challenges of it actually kind of, the solutions that you put on the ground, how does it pan out, is something that, we are still yet to understand. There's a lot more understanding, research that needs to emerge, which I personally think, just research institutions and academia cannot do, which is where working with people on the ground who are day in and day out operating out of that particular space will be able to give us those right solutions. Some of it could be even traditional knowledge.
Right. I'm also just thinking, in a country as large and diverse as ours, this question of scale is something that always comes into the picture. And I think from what you're saying, I understand that there's a lot of actually government investment that is needed in actually nudging communities to sort of adapt. But would you say that also this is also something that, when you said mitigation gets the limelight, I feel another challenge is also that because it's visible, do you think what is the role that political will have to play here? I mean, is there a role at all for it? Because I feel like adaptation is not something that could get you, a voter sort of, I mean, it's not something that would appeal to a vote bank. Do you think that there is that angle to it, or that it's still a while before the climate change becomes a political topic in India?
No, I think it's already become a political topic, even from a resilience and a adaptation perspective. I think the government language is built on resilience, whether it is climate resilient infrastructure, whether it is climate resilient agricultural systems. I think governments are talking about it. And working with the Ministry of Environment and Forest and Environment and Forest and Climate Change, we're also at CSTEP involved in what is called as this National Adaptation Plan preparation. And there is a lot of thinking that's going on in the ministries also with respect to adaptation. Because I think while mitigation will continue to happen, what is very well realized is that even if that is taken up much more rigorously, it'll be a while before you can slow down the process of climate change. So because, there's something called committed climate change, because we've already emitted a lot of gases into the atmosphere, and that is already up there. And the warming will continue to happen based on those, even if we don't emit anything additional, right? So given that, there is a lag between what you emit and how the climate system actually kind of reacts to it, or how do you feel the changes. So given that, I think adaptation is kind of becoming central to the thinking, while, the language that's used is about resilience, but climate adaptation is becoming more and more central to the way the governments are thinking. Whether you're working in Odisha, whether you're working in Tamil Nadu, whether you're working in Kerala, I think everybody is thinking about how do I protect my people? How do I protect my infrastructure? How do I protect my agricultural systems or fisheries or any other sector for that matter to these extreme hazards? So that's all about adaptation, and they're just thinking of it from what are the things that I can do? While, yes, the focus is a lot on hard infrastructure, but I think the soft infrastructure or the soft skills around capacity and governance is also kind of coming in. But yeah, we still have a long way to go there, but I'm pretty hopeful and I'm pretty heartened to see that I'm seeing signs of it now, and it will kind of become more and more central to the way the systems are working today or in the future.
Right. So, just coming back to this idea of collectives, when we talk about collectives, a lot of the idea of collective strength is also because, there's the idea of definitely representation, but also often women, and we've seen this in Kerala as well, where they kind of hold power as a collective, and they're actually able to push governments to kind of take action in a particular direction. So what could be the role of collectives to kind of create this push for adaptation?
Yeah. So I think
in a local context.
Right, right. So I think collectives do have a great role because they are able to reach the nook and corners that the governments typically don't reach, right? So I think that is the power, and I think that's the last mile connectivity, which is missing in many of the schemes and programs that do happen. And I think it is these collectives which actually take them to all the people who matter in the entire value chain. So given that, I think collectives so I think one of the key things is, collectives, now there could be collectives of collectives, which is what probably in my knowledge doesn't exist. I may be wrong, because there are people, there are these alliances, there are these collectives, there are n number of these that exist in different pockets. Even within a single state, there are multitude of them sometimes. Now, is there a way to bring them all into a common platform where you have a shared vision and you work towards the larger goal? Each of us could have our own pathways of reaching that, but the theory of change remains the same. Your end vision is how do we make adaptation a reality? How do we make people better equipped to cope with any climate extremes and erratic changes that are there? Now, if that is a shared vision, ultimately, okay, fine. If we don't even want to talk about climate, it's fine. Ultimately, the end goal or vision could be how do I safeguard people? Healthy planet, healthy people. If that is the vision, larger vision, then each of us are working in our own spaces, but then can we kind of all get together to see and also exchange notes, what works, what doesn't work, because each of the coalitions and cooperatives have their own ways of operating. Now, there are some things that work, some things that don't work. If there are successes, is there a possibility to kind of have a platform where there is exchange of knowledge, exchange of things that work, things that fail, more importantly, so that others don't repeat that? So I think that is really, really important. That's the only way where the collectives will have a larger voice, amplified voice in the system, which would kind of cannot be something that could be ignored at the highest level when they are taking certain decisions around, what needs to be done in this particular space.
All right. So I really like this thought of the idea of a collective of collectives. It's also something futuristic and maybe some food for thought for those of us who are in the space of organizing and sort of coalition building also for different kinds of and like you say, each of us are working in our own sectors, but how do we sort of come together? So that was a really great conversation. And I mean, it's clear that, bottom-up climate action actually needs concerted systemic support across finance, policy, and practice. Also, this role of collectives and coalitions, and all of them play a role in sort of reaching those who are most at risk. We've spoken about a lot of things. And to close, if you would like to leave listeners with one thought, for kind of policy action, what would it be?
I would say the only, I think staying curious, staying grounded, and staying connected. I think there's value in networks, there's value in being interconnected because, both you and I spoke about people, each of us working in different sectors. I mean, these sectors are something that for ease of operation, because there is funding or because that's where we are passionate about, we all work. But, in nature, everything is interconnected. Now, you work in agriculture, you can't ignore water, you can't ignore soil. So I think there is value in these connections. So which is what I would think is very, very important for us to recognize. And also, let's also remember, I'm sure Neha, you would definitely kind of resonate with this thought that we don't need a technical background to be part of this movement that you and I are talking about, right?
Right.
Whether one is a designer or a storyteller or a lawyer, each of us have a role to play. All of us can do something about it. Maybe I think everybody should start thinking about maybe to begin with volunteering with groups rather than actually, switching careers is a very big decision for many, right? Not everybody can do it, nor should everyone do it also. But then can all of us use whatever skills that we have? It could be storytelling, it could be writing, right? Because particularly many of these grassroots organizations, they do a lot of good work. What gets missed is because they're not able to kind of showcase it the way it should be. Can people kind of get in there and help them to showcase what they are doing? I think that would be a powerful way of creating visibility to lots of organizations which are working in this particular space. So I think that's the only thought that I would want to leave all of us with. Yes, climate work is not easy. It is deep, but it's deeply meaningful because it's not just about our generations. We're also thinking about the generations to come. And if we could leave this earth a better place, or even a place that's something worthy of safeguarding and something that's worthy of valuing, I think we would have pushed the envelope on what's possible.
And that's actually a great note to kind of end this episode. Thank you so much for speaking with me. And I feel like through this conversation, my own climate sort of lens has thickened. When you were talking about bioregions, I was just thinking about Ela Ben's idea of the 100-mile radius and creating sustainable communities. And actually, though the reason was economic and also women's mobility, centering economies around just the local economy, and it's also a Gandhian principle. But the idea that of a carbon footprint, like the carbon miles in actually travel and transporting, is not something that necessarily needs to happen. So thank you, and thank you for being with us today. That's it for today's episode of InSolidarity. If you found this conversation valuable, please share it further with friends and connections. And for more such lessons and insights on the latest topics concerning workers, cooperatives, and collectives, subscribe to our channel. That's all we have for today, and thank you for listening.